Alrighty, we are live for chapter 2 of Hatchet. If you missed the first exciting chapter, please go back to our Facebook page and look at it. We'll be also soon be making all of our videos that we have during this time available online as with YouTube as well. So we're just asking for everyone to join in. I'm going to give you guys a few minutes. I know you're getting the alerts on your phone and you're looking, you're like, oh yes, chapter 2 is on the way. So yes, we're about to start chapter 2. Again, we're going through the book Hatchet, which is by Gary Paulson. Just a brief little summary. Hatchet is a harrowing story of how a 13-year-old boy named Brian Roberson stays alive in the wilderness for 54 days following a plane crash. This is a modern classic and quite timely during this time of how someone has to show a lot of resilience in the face of trying times. And so we're excited to be going through this book. We're going to be doing 2 chapters a day. I know earlier I mistakenly said 2 o'clock, but I hope you turned in at 2 o'clock because you saw an awesome STEM activity led by our very own Brianna Pay. And so we're having a schedule. The schedule has been posted. We're going to be following those times. We're just here to offer you some virtual assistance and give you some virtual educational fun, training, learning, and some great things to do while you may be at home during this time. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'm hoping everyone is pressing the share button, getting this out. We're about to start chapter 2 of the Hatchet. So go ahead, hit that share button, text a friend, text a family member, get the kids together in the room as we're going to start chapter 2 of the Hatchet. Now remember, we had one of our members come by earlier and grab an extra copy of the book. We have limited copies available, but we do have also some other ways. If you need some help getting a copy, we can refer you to some other resources where you can get that as well. So please give us a call or stop by or shoot us a message. But we're ready to jump right into it. Just other few reminders that we have going on. We are still doing, I know we have stay-at-home orders. We want everyone to be safe and practice social distancing. But we do also have opportunities for those that are willing and able that you could come up to the club and we'll have meals that will be available. We'll be doing lunches from 12 to 1:30 every day, Monday through Friday. And we'll be doing suppers, which is going to start shortly from 3:30 to 5:30. So please feel free to come on, stop by and grab those meals. But I think we have people in here. I'm going to get set up so I have a computer next to me next time so I can see who's in the chat, who's commenting. Thank you, Matt, earlier. Hatchet as well is one of my favorite books. Gary Paulson was one of my favorite authors. He captured me and engrossed me into this, to the wilderness and survival, even though I never stepped foot in the forest in that capacity. But I was always engaged reading his books. And so, without further ado, let's jump into chapter 2. Remember, we got left with the cliffhanger at chapter 1. The plane, he's all alone in the plane right now. We're about to find out what happens. Also, we're modifying the schedule just a little bit. We're going to be doing chapters 1 and chapters 2 today, and then tomorrow morning, we're going to be going over a review over chapters 1 and 2, then go into chapters 3, and then do number 4 in the afternoon, and then the next day, do a review in the morning. That way, it'll give everyone a time. You may not be able to catch the broadcast live, go over with family members in the afternoon, and then we can catch back up the next day and do a little chapter review. So those questions for the chapter review will be posted as well. But let's get into it. Hatchet by Gary Paulson, chapter number 2. For a time that he could not understand, Brian could do nothing. Even after his mind began working, he could see what had happened. He could do nothing. It was as if his hands and arms were lead. Then he looked for ways for it not to have happened. Be asleep, his mind screamed at the pilot. Just be asleep, and your eyes will open now, and your hands will take the controls, and your feet will move the pedals. But it did not happen. The pilot did not move, except that his head rolled on a neck impossibly loose as the plane hit a small bit of turbulence. The plane. Somehow, the plane was still flying. Seconds had passed, nearly a minute, and the plane flew on as if nothing had happened. And he had to do something, but he did not know what. Help. He had to get help. He stretched one hand toward the pilot, saw that his fingers were trembling, and touched the pilot on the chest. He did not know what to do. He knew there were procedures that you could do mouth-to-mouth on victims of heart attacks and push their chests, CPR. But he did not know how to do it, and in any case, not to do it with a pilot who was sitting up in a seat and still strapped in with his seatbelt. So he touched the pilot on the tips of his fingers, touched him on the chest, and could feel nothing. No heartbeat, no rise and fall of breathing, which meant the pilot was almost certainly dead. Please, Brian said, but did not know who or what to ask. Please. The plane lurched again, hit more turbulence, and Brian felt the nose of the plane drop. It did not dive, but the nose went down slightly, and the down angle increased the speed. He knew that at this angle, this slight angle down, he would ultimately fly into the trees. He could see them ahead on the horizon, where before he could only see sky. He had to fly it somehow. Had to fly the plane. He had to help himself. The pilot was gone. Beyond anything he could do, he had to try and fly the plane. He turned back in his seat, feeling from the front and putting his hands, still trembling, on the control wheel. His feet gently on the rudder pedals. He pulled back on the stick to rise the plane. He knew that from reading. You always pulled back on the wheel. He gave it a tug, and it slid back towards him easily. Too easily. The plane, with the increased speed from the down tilt, swooped eagerly up and drove Brian's stomach down. He pushed the wheel back in, went too far this time, and the plane's nose went below the horizon and the engine speed increased with the shallow drive. Too much. He pulled back again, more gently this time, and the nose floated up again, too far, but not as violently as before. Then down a bit too much, and up again very easily, and the front of the engine cowling settled. When he had it aimed at the horizon and it seemed to be steady, he held the wheel where it was and let out his breath, which he had been holding all this time, and tried to think what to do next. It was a clear blue sky day with fluffy bits of clouds here and there, and he looked out the window for a moment, hoping to see something. A town, a village, but there was nothing, just the green of the trees, endless green, and lakes scattered more and more thickly as the plane flew. Where? He was flying, but did not know where. He had no idea where he was going. He looked at the dashboard of the plane, studied the dials, and hoped to get some help, hoped to find a compass, but it was also confusing. A jumble of numbers and lights. One lighted display in the top center of the dashboard said the number 342. Another next to it said 22. Down beneath, there were dials with lines that seemed to indicate what the wings were doing, tipping or moving, and one dial with a needle pointed to the number 70, which he only thought, might be the altimeter. The device that told him his height above the ground, or above sea level. Somewhere he had read something about altimeters, but he couldn't remember what or where or anything about them. Slightly to the left and below the altimeter, he saw a small rectangular panel with a lighted dial and two knobs. His eyes had passed over it 2 or 3 times before he saw what was written in tiny letters on top of the panel. Transmitter 221 was stamped in the metal, and it hit him. Finally, that was the radio. The radio, of course. He had to use the radio. When the pilot had been hit that way, he couldn't bring himself to say that the pilot was dead. He couldn't even think of it. He had been trying to use the radio. Brian looked at the pilot. The headset was still in his head, turned sideways a bit from his jamming back into the seat, and the microphone switch was clipped to his belt. Brian had to get the headset from the pilot, had to reach over to get the headset from the pilot, or he would not be able to use the radio to call for help. He had to reach over. His hands began trembling again. He did not want to touch the pilot, did not want to reach for him, but he had to get the radio. He lifted his hands from the wheel, just slightly, and held them waiting to see what would happen. The plane flew normally, smoothly. All right, he thought, now to do this thing. He turned and reached for the headset, slid it from the pilot's head, one eye on the plane, waiting for it to dive. The headset came easily, but the microphone switch at the pilot's belt was jammed in, and he had to pull to get it loose. When he pulled, his elbow bumped the wheel and pushed it in as the plane started down in a shallow dive. Brian grabbed the wheel and pulled it back too hard again, and the plane went through another series of stomach-wrenching swoops up and down before he could get it under control. When things had settled again, he pulled at the mic cord once more and at last jerked the cord free. It took him another second or two to place the headset on his own head and position the small microphone tube in front of his mouth. He had seen the pilot use it, had seen him depress the switch at his belt, so Brian pushed the switch in and blew into the mic. He heard the sound of his breath in the headset. Hello? Is anybody listening on this? Hello? He repeated it 2 or 3 times and then waited, but heard nothing except his own breathing. Panic came then. He had been afraid, had been stopped with the terror of what was happening. But now panic came and he began to scream into the microphone, scream over and over. Help! Somebody help me! I'm in this plane and don't know. And he started crying. with the screams, crying and slamming his hands against the wheel of the plane, causing it to jerk down, then back up. But again, he heard nothing but the sound of his own sobs into the microphone, his own screams mocking him, coming back into his ears. The microphone. Awareness cut into him. He had used a CB radio in his uncle pickup once. You had to turn the mic switch off to hear anybody else. He reached for the belt and released the die switch. For a second, all he heard was a whoosh of empty airwaves. Then through the noise and static, he heard a voice. Whoever is calling on this radio net, I repeat, release your mic switch. You are covering me. You are covering me. Over. It stopped and Brian hit his mic switch. I hear you. I hear you. This is me. He released the switch. Roger, I have you now. The voice is very faint and breaking up. Please state your difficulty and location and say over to signal the end of the transmission. Over. Please state my difficulty, Brian thought. God, my difficulty. I'm in a plane with a pilot who has had a heart attack or something. He can't fly and I don't know how to fly. Help me. Help. He turned his mic off without ending the transmission properly. There was a moment's hesitation before the answer. Your signal is breaking up and I lost most of it. Understand? Pilot, you can't fly, correct? Over. Brown can barely hear him now. Heard mostly noise and static. That's right, I can't fly. The plane is flying now, but I don't know how much longer. Over. Lost signal. Your location, please. Flight number. Location. I don't know my flight number or location. I don't know anything. I told you that. Over. He waited now. Waited, but there was nothing. Once, for a second, he thought he heard a break in the noise, some part of a word, but it could have been static. 2, 3 minutes, 10 minutes. The plane roared and Brian listened, but heard no one. Then he hit the switch again. I do not know the flight number. My name is Brian Roberson, and we left Hampton, New York, headed for the Canadian oil fields to visit my father. And I don't know how to fly an airplane, and the pilot, he let go of the mic. His voice was starting to rattle, and he felt as if he might start screaming at any second. He took a deep breath. If there's anybody listening who can help me fly a plane, please answer. Again, he released the mic, but heard nothing but the hissing noise in the headset. After half an hour of listening and repeating the cry for help, he tore the headset off in frustration and threw it to the floor. It all seemed so hopeless. Even if he did get somebody, what could anybody do? Tell him to be careful? All so hopeless. He tried to figure out the dials again. He thought he might know which was speed. It was a lighted number that read 160, but he didn't know if that was actual miles an hour or kilometers, or if it just meant how fast the plane was moving through the air and not over the ground. He knew airspeed was different from ground speed, but not by how much. Parts of books he read about flying came to him, how wings worked, how the propeller pulled the plane through the sky, simple things that wouldn't help him now. Nothing could help him now. An hour passed. He picked up the headset and tried again. He knew in the end all he had, but there was no answer. He felt like a prisoner, kept in a small cell that was hurtling through the sky at what he thought to be 160 miles an hour, headed, he didn't know where, just headed somewhere until, there it was. Until what? Until he ran out of fuel. When the plane ran out of fuel, it would go down, period. He could pull the throttle out and make it go down now. He had seen the pilot push the throttle in to increase the speed. If he pulled the throttle back, the engine would slow down and the plane would go down. Those were his choices. He could wait for the plane to run out of gas and fall, or he could push the throttle in and make it happen sooner. If he waited for the plane to run out of fuel, he would go farther, but he did not know which way he was moving. When the pilot jerked, he moved the plane, but Brian could not remember how much or if it had gone back to his original course. Since he did not know the original course anyway, and could only guess at which display might be the compass, the one reading 342, he did not know where he had been or where he was going, so it didn't make much difference if he went down now or waited. Everything in him rebelled against stopping the engine and falling now. He had a vague feeling that he was wrong to keep heading as the plane was heading, and a feeling that he might be going off in the wrong direction, but he could not bring himself to stop the engine and fall. Now he was safe, or safer than if he went down. The plane was flying, he was still breathing. When the engine stopped, he would go down. So he left the plane running, holding altitude, and kept trying the radio. He worked out a system. Every 10 minutes, by the small clock built into the dashboard, he tried the radio with a simple message. I need help. Is there anyone listening to me? In the times between transmissions, he tried to prepare himself for what he knew was coming. When he ran out of fuel, the plane would start down. He guessed that without the propeller pulling, he would have to push the nose down to keep the plane flying. He thought he may have read somewhere or it just came to him. Either way, it made sense. He would have to push the nose down to keep flying speed, and then just before he hit, he'll pull the nose back up to slow the plane as much as possible. It all made sense. Glide down, then slow the plane, and hits. Hits. He would have to find a clearing as he went down. The problem with that is he hadn't seen one clearing since they started flying over the forest. Some swamps, but they had trees scattered through them. No roads, no trails, no clearings. Just the lakes. And it came to him that he would have to use a lake for landing. If he went down in the trees, he was certain to die. The trees would tear the plane to pieces as it went into him. He would have to come down in a lake. No, on the edge of a lake. He would have to come down near the edge of a lake and try to slow the plane as much as possible just before he hit the water. Easy to say, he thought. Hard to do. Easy to say, hard to do. Easy to say, hard to do. It became a chant that beat with the engine. Easy to say, hard to do. Impossible to do. He repeated the radio call 17 times at the 10-minute intervals, working on what he would do between transmissions. Once more, he reached over to the pilot and touched him on his face, but the skin was cold, hard cold, death cold. And Brian turned back to the dashboard. He did what he could, tightened his seatbelt, positioned himself, rehearsed mentally again and again what his procedure should be. When the plane ran out of gas, he should hold the nose down and head for the nearest lake and try to fly the plane kind of onto the water. That's what he thought, kind of fly the plane onto the water. And just before it hit, he would pull back on the wheel and slow the plane down to reduce the impact. Over and over, his mind ran the picture of how it would go. The plane running out of gas, flying the plane onto water, the crash. From pictures he's seen on television, he tried to visualize it. He tried to be ready. But between the 17th and 18th radio transmission, without a warning, the engine coughed, roared violently for a second, and died. There was a sudden silence, cut only by the sound of the wind-milling propeller and the wind past the cockpit. Brian pushed the nose of the plane down and threw up. Whew! Are you talking about another cliffhanger? Well, we just finished chapter 2, and here we have Brian now running out of gas on a Cessna, a small single-engine plane, over a wilderness, not knowing where he's going, not knowing what he's doing, and we don't know what happened next. Well, if you want to find out, please tune back in tomorrow morning at 12 o'clock. Remember, we're going to start tomorrow morning with a review of chapters 1 and 2. This is going to give you a chance to reshare this video, to watch it again with family members, and to have more people tune in. Please be on the lookout. Like I said, we'll be posting updates with review questions. We're going to be allowing this to also be viewed online at YouTube over the course of the week. So please, two things. Please share and please tune in. So remember, the times tomorrow are 12 and 3 p.m. We'll be going over chapters 3 and 4. We got to find out what happens now, because now the plane's going down. We don't know how Brian's going to survive this. So if you want to find out what happens next, please tune in tomorrow. Tell your friends and family. Catch us here at 12 noon to find out what happens next. Don't forget that food will be served in about 12 minutes. We're going to be serving food at 3:30. We got great options from some local restaurants in the community. Tres Hombres and McDonald's have contributed, so we're so thankful for them. So please join us for a meal later on, and we'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.